Ask the Podcast Coach for June 29th, 2024.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. I realized I was not center of frame. I had to kind of get back into the center. Hey, 4th of July or pre-4th of July weekend for our American friends. Have a very safe week. Keep all fingers and toes inside the boat at all times.
And if you're in the UK, get out and vote, because it's the best time to vote. It's the best time to vote ever. This is the best show called Ask the Podcast Coach. There will never be another better show. We're not going to be talking politics today, but I think all countries can kind of go, hey, can you please not judge us based on our elect? I want to take a page out of the UK. They have 6 weeks. That's it. Not a year.
Yeah.
Just like get it in, get it done. I like that idea.
It'd be kind of nice. It would be nice if it was shorter.
Yeah. So
it's not shorter though. You know what we do have? We have got a good long coffee pour ready for us. We
do. We also have somebody in the green room, which is great fun.
Oh, nice. So hang tight.
So hang tight, DR. And that coffee pour is brought to you by, of course, our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. The beautiful thing of Mark, really, is the fact that he's a podcaster. He's an award-winning podcaster, and that means you don't have to explain. It's kind of like a radio show, but it's not. No. And I've used Mark for really the last 5 shows. Ask the Podcast Coach, School of Podcasting, Podcast Rodeo Show. I used him for Podcast Hot Seat. I used him for your podcast website. So I'm not just saying this. It's like he does really good stuff. And the beauty of it is he's going to sit down with you one-on-one and you tell him what your show's about, and then he'll come back with a marketing idea because he really wants to make sure that everything is just in alignment, and he's going to make you look amazing. He's gone over 500 different artwork for people. And if you're like, well, I kind of like my artwork, and you're like, well, how do you like your website? And you go, ugh, looks like a kindergarten made it. Well, Mark does that too. He'll do your website. He'll do anything that you want to look good. Check him out. He's over there at podcastbranding.co.
And of course, big thanks to Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast.com this week, looking at black sails. And if you need a new podcast to listen to, something different, by the way, he's got tons of these available for you. Just about as many movies as you can think of, he's maybe reviewed out there. That may not be a true statement, but he does have a lot that is out there. Visit it today, based on a true story podcast.com. Dan, thanks for your sponsorship. And the coffee is always delicious.
There we go. And in theory, if I do this and press this button, it says, hey, coming to the stage is the one and only DR, and it should take us over to, no, it's not. Okay. So how are you?
Hey, I'm great. I wanted to, number one, give you kudos, Dave, for the Advanced Strategies podcast for podcast creators, that video that you did.
Oh, for Libsyn. Yep.
I watched it all the way through. It was great. But you said something in it that really perked up my ears, and you kind of said it as like an off-the-cuff kind of passing kind of thing. It happened in minute 41.
Okay.
And you were talking about editing.
Yes.
And taking out the boring stuff.
Right.
And what if your guest said something really, really great at the 20-minute mark, and you're like a 25-minute podcast? Yeah. There's nothing stopping you from taking that and putting it up forward. And then you said, I wrote these words down, maybe make a story arc if you want to get creative. So that's my question. What do you mean? What is your definition of a story arc, and how do I create it?
Got it. It's takes more work, of course. Anytime you say, I want to add this, you're going to add some time to that. A story arc, if you Google the phrase, the hero's journey, or just go watch the original Star Wars, So you have the reluctant hero, in this case Luke Skywalker, and then some sort of bad thing happens, or he doesn't want to do something. In this case, he doesn't want to be a Jedi, and then he finds a mentor. Now, typically, the mentor is you. If
I
you're
knew
a
I'd get
coach,
the nerd out of you.
yeah,
I knew I could bring that nerd right out of you.
and then from there, the mentor then talks him into it. He doesn't think he's going to do it. Oh my gosh, the world's going to end. And then it doesn't, because, the hero comes through. And then at the end, there's the coming back home, and, he gets the girl, whatever the final thing is, and then you walk off. So it's this whole like, oh, I don't think it's going to work. John Lee Dumas did this, and I don't know if he did it on purpose. If you listen to Entrepreneur on Fire, it's like, why did you start? What was your biggest hurdle? And then what was your aha moment? So there's, that's where you get your mentor, and then you came through. And then, so it's that whole, like, another great book is, I hate this book, but it's called Out on the Wire. And the reason I hate it is because it's a comic book. I'm sorry, adult, what do you call these things? It's
Anime.
it's a graphic novel. And DR, I don't know if you have a chance to change your audio, but we're using something that's not your microphone, and it's creating all sorts of caca. Here, let me see if I can edit you. Nope. I can change how you look, but I can't change how you sound.
Okay, I'm clicking on the gear, and I actually do not see my ATR 2100 a choice.
Do you have a mute button?
On.
There we go. So just do that when you're not talking. But anyway, this talks about there was a person, and you're not going to believe what happened, but this. And then they actually go, oh, but wait, there's more. And then this happened, and you're like, wait, what? And then sometimes they'll throw in a third one, and then it's, and here's how they overcame it, or here's what the result was, and here's why you should care, is the thing. And if you listen to any NPR, they follow this like a textbook. So I basically got the book and boiled it down to like, that's the big takeaway of the book. You could probably Google that and find it. So how I do that is I use Hindenburg. And so if I can, I will, in fact, it's funny. I just had somebody say, how do you do a kind of a, what do you call these things? I call it NPR, not branded. It's, I'm drawing a total brain fart on this, but narrative, it's a narrative style podcast. So now I'll be like, DR thought she would get into the podcasting business and make lots of money. And then there's a clip of you going, I just love to help people, and I've always loved podcasting and blah, blah, blah. But what she didn't know was that, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, yeah, I tried to do this and I couldn't find out. I'm knocking on all the doors I know of, but then she met this one person who really needed her help. Yeah, I got this one client, his name was so-and-so and blah, blah, blah. And it turned out he knew a ton of people that, and so it's just the whole, I don't think you're injecting, I wonder what happens next is the key to kind of a story arc. You're kind of that. Jim, am I missing anything off of?
No, I think it's a good summary. You're just building tension, right? And listen, story arcs and clickbait are super close. Like there's a very fine line between the two of those, as far as like, because I've heard this story arc built in a way that's disingenuous sometimes too, where it's manufactured. You're like, you'll never believe that the bait of you'll never believe what happens next. That's kind of a derivative of a story arc. So I think you have to be careful that you don't create something that's not there.
Not there, yeah.
Right? Or make a bigger deal about it, he lit the match. See what happens next, like that kind of thing. So, I think that's a good explanation.
Just an example of just a narrative style is episode 873 of the School of Podcasting, where I interviewed Deidre Chen from Cap Show, and I basically just took it. And how I do that, the last time, I forget the last person I did this with, but it's weird because I have separate tracks. So I have my track and then I have the guest track. And last time I did this, I just took the guest track. So I didn't even know what the question was that I asked. And I listened to the answer and then I go, does that deliver value to my audience? Yes, it does. Good. Okay, over here. And then I'll rename it. This was them talking. Then I'll go to the next answer. Okay, does this deliver value to my audience? No, they're kind of rambling and I don't know what they're talking about. Okay, you're not going in. And I just go to each answer and then I rename them and I look at it and go, okay, how can I group these so that they kind of make sense, that there's a little bit of momentum, just anything to make it flow. So, and then there's sometimes when I'm like, oh, that's a good answer. It doesn't really fit in. And to me, being the musician, I'm like, that's where you have a bunch of hard rock songs and you got this one reggae song that's fun and it makes you want to, it doesn't fit with the rest of it. And, you give that as a bonus to somebody or whatever. But does that kind of help?
It does. Thank
Okay.
you so much. The whole narrative thing now it's open to this. I was trying to figure out how would I do this with an interview show.
Yeah.
The narrative and keeping it together like Frankenstein. I call it Frankensteining it together.
Yeah.
That's totally good. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks.
Absolutely.
You too.
Thanks for coming on, DR.
We'll
Great
see
to
you.
meet you. Thanks for coming on.
The joys of technology. Here's the one cool thing.
Well, and let me just say, just podcasters, just do yourself a favor. Make sure your default sound settings, whether in PC or Mac, are always set to your mic, because oftentimes the software will just pick up whatever's default.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, this is probably the first time DR was coming in or
to Ecamm, maybe. Yeah.
This.
Yeah.
Right. And so it'll just pick up it. We think the computer's being feisty. We're like, why can't it pick the right thing? Well, you told it, or you defaulted to it of a default mic at some point in some cases. So just make sure both Windows and Mac, I think, have default settings. Windows for sure, I know that. Make sure your default microphone, go into the settings, is set to whatever microphone you use on a regular basis. This gets to be a problem if you're switching microphones all the time. For whatever reason, it'll get confused. So anyways, there's get your nerd on about default settings for microphones.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and no shade at all at DR. I mean, obviously she's been around forever. In fact,
right on.
She just apparently someone has a, like, I have the School of Podcasting where I help you podcast. Somebody has a like podcast coach school. I think it's Adam from Podcast Business School, because I saw on Facebook she's like, hey, I passed. I'm now a certified podcast coach, and I was like, is that a thing? Because I'm not certified. Like, I'm, so.
Well, we're certifiable.
That's it.
There's that.
Yeah.
There's that.
But DR, thanks for coming in. And
yeah, no worries, DR, on the microphone. No worries on that.
Yeah.
It happens to me all the time. In fact, there's never been a more frustrating moment than when I've actually recorded a podcast at work, and somehow Windows does some weird things. This is where Windows is against you sometimes. It'll set that default microphone on its own for some reason. Something like if you unplug it and then plug it back in, it'll get confused and reset the default to something else. And then it ends up going to the microphone. And it's so frustrating when I have guest hosts that don't tell me I'm on the wrong microphone.
Yeah.
I've done a whole podcast off the webcam, and you're like, why didn't you say something? Like, I didn't know. Like, how can you not hear how bad that was? So that's frustrating too. So I've gotten kind of in the habit and just checking every time. You just kind of before we get started, I'm okay. Did it pick up the right microphone? I hope it did. I know with you, Dave, you'll know for sure. You'll be like, stop.
Well, as soon as she started talking, I was like, she's got a Q2U this far from her mouth. And I'm like, that's not the Q2U. No. And it was okay. I was like, it's no big deal. Yeah. Well, my thing that I'm trying to figure out how to do on my Mac is it keeps picking up my earbuds. And, and I'll be like, I don't want to use my earbuds. I use those with my phone, and I'll have to go in because I'll be listening on my phone, and all of a sudden my earbuds just go dead. And I'm like, like, they're connected to my Mac. And I'm like, I don't want to connect to the Mac.
Yeah. Todd the Gator says sometimes a Windows update will change your default input as well, and that is true.
That's what happened with my Mac.
Yeah. Sometimes an update will reset some things, so it's just good practice. It's a good habit. Just check it from, before you go on. Just do it. In fact, I did a double check just a few minutes ago. Like, I knew you you would have said something if I wasn't on my mic, because you can tell the difference between the two. But it's good to check.
Yeah, Gary says I had a guest who had a loose cable. I was last night. I rewired the sound system at my church, which was tons of fun, if I do say so myself. Also, you know what's funner than a paper cut? A cardboard cut. I was opening up a new keyboard and had to get the thing and just was like, and I was like, ow. And I was like, didn't even think about it. I looked down later, I'm bleeding all over my hand. I'm like,
pools of blood all over everything.
yeah. But the fun thing was I could not get the audio. I'm testing this because we do our church on Zoom, and which for the record sounds horrendous. If you do any music on Zoom, even if you say I'm a musician, forget it. It just completely squelches it out. But I could not get the audio from the soundboard into the Zoom meeting. I'm like, it's going to the Mac and blah, blah, blah. And I went over and just jiggled the cable. And I was like, there you go. When in doubt, jiggle the cable. But she mentioned I did basically, it's something I've done on the School of Podcasting. It's like everything I know about interviews. So things like, number one, your podcast is your home. And if your guest comes in, I had some people push back on that. I said, look, unless it's a celebrity that you can only get this way, if it's somebody, if it's an author and they're going to use the built-in laptop mic, I'm like, no, not in my house. Sorry. Go get a microphone. And they're like, I don't know if I feel comfortable asking them to go buy a microphone. And go, if they're going on a publicity tour, go get a microphone. Come on, give me a break. But the fun part was I found out they use Restream. And I found out that it's kind of cool. You have scenes, kind of like we have scenes here in Ecamm. They have scenes in Restream. And my solo stream was here. And then I'm off center. Wait, I need to go here. And then the one with my slides was here. So I found out, I could just go up and down. And then once I got to the scene with my slides, I could use the up, down arrow key or the left, right keys. So I'm like, cool, this is easy. I don't have to worry about clicking the mouse and this and that. So I'm just cruising along and everything's fine. And all of a sudden I went to go back up to where I'm the solo guy and I accidentally hit up twice. Well, the scene above me was a video. And which we played at the very beginning of it. So all of a sudden in the middle, Dave's back to the opening video and I'm hitting down, 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 and nothing. It's like, nope, going to play this video first before we move. And I'm like, so I just went completely transparent. I went to our video guy at Libsyn as Brian. I'm like, Brian, if you know a way to get that to stop, I'll be happy. And I just went back to it. And finally I'm on my solo page. And I'm like, great. I go, let's see if we can get slide 19 to show up. And I just clicked on right, and there it was. And even the chat room's like, yes, slide 19. And so my point is that if that had happened, because when I get done with a Libsyn webinar, I am drenched in sweat. I don't know why. It's somehow being the voice of Libsyn for an hour is a little more stressful. And if that had happened, 5 years ago, I probably would have cried and ran away. So it was like, oh, all right, well, this is happening. Okay, we'll do this and do that. So it's, you just, and that's just shame on me. I should have probably, because I figured that out like 15 minutes before we went. And I did a little like, just up, down, blah, blah, blah. And it just, I fat fingered it and that's what happened. So it is what it is. Jody says, make sure to check your levels too. Yeah, Windows has a habit of changing my levels from what I have it set to, the whole 100%, and have it set to, I see 100%. And then, I've gotten the habit of checking my sound. Yeah, I know for a while, back in the days of Skype, and now actually with Zoom, that whole automatically set the level thing, Skype was horrible for that. Because what would happen is when you weren't talking, it would be listening and going, I don't hear Dave. And so it would turn the volume all the way up, the input volume. And all of a sudden it sounded like you're at the ocean. It's like, and then the minute you talked, you're like, well, I think it'd be like, and it was like this, like, okay.
You'd come in at 1,000 decibels too. I mean, you'd come in blown out, and then and the better your mic, or, especially with a condenser mic where, those spy camera mics where you can hear all the way across the room. Those were particularly bad, and so if you weren't careful, it was kind of a mess. You were talking about Zoom and not using that for church stuff. We've been using Zoom at work, and we try to play videos through it, and there isn't just there is no worse experience on Zoom than trying to play videos. Like, why doesn't Zoom? They've been around long enough. On StreamYard, as an example, if you want to play videos, I think Ecamm is this way too. You upload the video to their servers, and then it plays from there, as opposed to it trying to play from somebody's desktop. And yes, we've gotten better with bandwidth and some of those
Yeah.
kinds of things, but it's such a terrible experience on Zoom. And you just want to be like, Zoom, have you not figured out? And maybe they have, and we're not doing it right. But you're like, have you not figured out people want to play videos on these things? Make it a better experience to do
Yeah.
that. It's just terrible.
Well, that's where their goal is, to make sure that I can hear you. It was made for meetings,
For sure.
And
for sure.
it does a great job of that. That's where, if you compared it to, the good old days of Skype and all that, it was like, oh, this is great. And it was easier to connect. You didn't have to install any software. That was the big thing back in the day. So yeah, Jody says, I have 2 mics, one inside my booth and one outside my booth on my podcast. And it's frustrating when Windows decides it knows what I need. It doesn't matter what my default is set to. So that's always fun. Yeah. Narrative style. Yeah. Rich brings up something. If you go to your podcast website right now, there's only one interview over there, and it's with Greg, and he's a web designer as well. And I did that narrative. I love narrative style. It just takes more time. And so if I have an interview where I'm not editing out anything and everything is just the way, I'm like, here's just the interview. But what was funny is I'm getting ready this weekend. I'll be creating the first episode of Podcast Hot Seat, formerly known as Podcast Rodeo Show. And this is different. I'm bringing the people on. And so I brought on Stephanie Graham. And at the end, I said, well, let's put me on the hot seat, because she's part of that deal is you get a month at the School of Podcasting. And I said, anything I can change at the School of Podcasting? She's like, no, not really. She goes, but the one thing I wish I could figure out is, like, what's it like to be, like, what's your day like? And that whole 9 yards. And she goes, like, I'd love to know how to do a narrative style podcast. So I'm going to take her episode, this is going to get very meta, of Podcast Hot Seat, do it narrative style, and make a video for the School of Podcasting on how I did it, which is just what I basically said. You figure out how many pieces you got, and then you figure out what story you want to tell and where you can kind of throw in some, I wonder what happens next. And we'll go that route. I'll give you a little preview. If you want to know if you're, and I'm waiting for her to get back to me on this, but I'm listening to her opening music. And do you remember the old Batman show with, yeah, they had this weird kind of audio thing.
In between the breaks or in between the segments. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this cool kind of hip hop vibe. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's like, and it sounded great. And I was like a remix of it. Yeah. So I grabbed Shazam before she came in. And, there's like 3 seconds of music, and Shazam is like, oh, that's insert rapper's name that I can't remember here, featuring so-and-so. And I just said, hey, just so you know. And she actually said I bought it from this company that said I have the license to it. And I go, well, go back and check your license, because if it's for radio, podcasting and radio, really different, because a podcast is a download. And you get into really boring things like mechanical rights and blah, blah, blah. And I said, so what was cool is I have a tool, and I know everybody's going to go, what's it called? Let me fire up Hindenburg in the background here. And it's a noise reduction tool. And I was able to take out the music and still hear her. And I was like, that's pretty crazy.
Wow, that's cool.
It's from Waves. It is called Clarity VX. And I saw they have a thing right now where most of their plugins are $29, and the demo of it is somebody's on a New York street. So you got cars whizzing by and that whole 9 yards, and you just watch the guy turn the dial, and they totally dialed out the noise. So it's not so much for like hiss, but more for just isolating the vocal. And I was doing something and was like, let me see if I have I do not. I thought I had I know if you go to supportthisshow.com, and I don't know if it's Waves or Wave, probably Waves. That's more or less probably my affiliate link for that. And I'm making a mess in the chat room. Excellent. Here's a fun thing. We've talked about this before. Sometimes, how do you know? I've got a couple things here on like finding ideas. And so this one is from Michael Hyatt, who I'm a huge fan of. And this was on Facebook yesterday. He says, the digital planner. Michael is all about planning and making the best year ever and really just goal setting, that kind of stuff. And so he says, the digital planner, it's not happening. We decided to pull the plug on this project. Frankly, we only had about 3 to 5 people submit feedback in Q1, which we took as a proxy for broader market feedback. As a result, we just don't feel the opportunity is big enough to justify the effort, which is sad because had I known that, I would have, Mike, I would love a digital planner. But he says, in another post, I commented that I was going to try to have the Q3 planner ready tomorrow. Unfortunately, well, that's not going to happen, but we don't want to leave you hanging. So if you legitimately didn't order a paper planner because you were waiting on the digital one, see, that's cool because he's trusting people here. Like, hey, if you were going to buy this, but you didn't, please private message me. We'll send you a paper planner for free. Just tell me which one you want. We'll also expedite shipping at our expense. So it's kind of a cool way and he didn't really make a mistake. He thought his audience wanted this and he created something. He asked for feedback, and that's where I'm like, I'm on his email list. So somehow I missed him asking for feedback because I don't like paper planners because I want something I can have on my phone. And but that's something where I just thought it was interesting where he's like, okay, I'm asking for feedback. I'm not getting any. That kind of is a red flag in itself that, okay, if I can't get any feedback on something, we're just going to pull the plug on it. So sometimes, you try something and it works. What I would love to know is how long he's been working on that. I was trying to find that out because it's one thing to pull the plug after a week. Okay, that's not enough time for people to get caught up or whatever. But I was like, it's like sometimes it doesn't work. And, so I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, that's a tough call. Like, there's a lot of things you can do there. You could release it and it can have a very short lifespan. That's kind of the Google model. They're going to try it. They're going to release it. They're going to let it be out there. Then they're not afraid to kill it after it's been released. Maybe in this case with Michael that you think, boy, this didn't really turn out like we thought it would, and it's going to generate a ton of support tickets. Let's kill it before it gets there, just because we have other things in the pipeline and we know we can do differently. I think our podcasts are this way sometimes too, where Coach Days is not getting feedback mostly means you're living in 2024. Yeah. Unless you're on YouTube. I think but
that's
not
true.
us.
Yeah.
But not us. Last week, we even asked for it explicitly in the video. And then I left a comment on the video saying, what? No comments. And we still got no comments. So whatever, YouTube. What? Yeah. See, I'm telling you, it's us, not them. So with podcasting, I think sometimes we think we should release just everything we've recorded. And listen, most of the time that's true, but I think there's some moments. And physician, heal thyself. I'm talking to myself at this point. There are times we record things that should never see the light of day. And before they ever go public, you should just absolutely kill them. And I know, maybe you had a guest on and you're afraid you're going to be embarrassed because you got to tell them what they didn't work, some of those kinds of things. But just kill it before. Get mercy, have a mercy killing and don't release it. So that it's smart in some cases. Now the trick is knowing when to and when not to. That's the hard part. Like, it's not always an easy decision. You don't always know it, and you never know if it was the right one or if it was the wrong one, even in the future sometimes. But there certainly there are times when you get to the end of a cycle and you're like, I shouldn't have done this. I should not have released this. Right.
I had an episode of The Logical Weight Loss when I was doing that show. And I remember going, kind of like, should I click publish on this? And it was a
Yeah.
woman that had an air conditioner in the background. And I said, let's be quiet for 10 seconds so I can get a good sample of the noise and I'll remove. And it just sounded horrible. And I was like, and I was like, well, it's listenable, barely. And I put it out and woke up to 3 emails going, what was that? And I was like, sorry.
Yeah.
Like, it sounded like a tin can. Danny says, I've been enjoying these zombie Google podcast updates from James Cridlin. Yeah. So they announced, Google Podcast is going away and it's going away globally on this date. And Google Podcast Manager, it's going away. And then it kind of didn't. And then it did. And now it's back. And it's like, so this whole, I was like, well, more great examples of how you can trust everything from Google. I was just like, come on, boys. Is this a case where you already fired the Google team and nobody knows how to go in and kill it? I'm like, what's going on?
That makes sense. Or they've moved on. Most likely they moved on to other things. So oftentimes they'll redeploy those folks, but no, you're right. You got to kind of wonder.
I don't know if I have this one. No, not really. I'll just read this one. This is from our over at Reddit. She says, hello, everyone. Me, United States, and my buddy from the UK are starting a podcast. And she says, he's now full-time in the States, so it's go time. This has been on my mind for years, whether solo or with a co-host. I'm at the same spot I was before. I'm ready to record, I'm ready to market, and ready to make people laugh. My problem is, as she has the title here, I'm still struggling to come up with a topic. So her title is struggling to come up with topics or single topic to focus on. She goes, whether it's broad or not, I can't seem to find something I'm confident in recording. I'm rather knowledgeable in a variety of topics, but nothing is sticking. I've been thinking about using our social media to reach out to run polls and come up with one topic or just our first topic. How do you decide what works? And so to me, anytime I hear this, I'm like, don't press record yet. Like, figure out, because to me, most of the podcasters that are really like having fun or they're getting past 7, they really want to talk about this subject. And they like, no, I want to help people with this, or I love to just tell stories or whatever it is. And I said, come up with 10 topics for whatever your first 10 episodes are, and then go in and basically, pick one and go with it. And I said, even do this, record it on your phone, bring up voice recorder and pretend you're doing it. And when you're done, delete it. Like, just do it. And I don't know if this is a case, because what happens a lot in some cases is you think about the audience. I'm going to put this podcast out to I need reverb. And, you don't have one yet. And so don't worry about it. And in the past, I would have said, don't start at all. And now I say, hey, maybe this is your training wheels. Like, start a podcast that you probably aren't going to be doing in 6 months, because you'd be like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. And then start your real one. Like, do something. But I don't know. When you hear this kind of stuff, Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, same old what you're saying. Record some things, put it out there, listen to it, edit it, then throw it away.
Yeah.
Like the hardest part, we're talking about this. Like, the hardest part for most podcasters is deleting things. Yeah. And everything you make is not good, right? So delete stuff. You got to get good at it. You got to kind of realize, like, yeah, that's garbage. I should cut that part out. We shouldn't do those kinds of things. Yeah. And so you just get in there, get some stuff recorded, get some feedback. Sometimes we are focused on starting. And I want to just say, you need to practice. Like, NFL players, any professional sports player have been practicing for years before they're any good at what they do. And so just make sure you're getting some practice in there and be okay with that. It doesn't have to, your first thing is going to be terrible. They're awful. Yeah. So just record them, get them out of the way, and then throw them away. Because you're not ever going to want to listen to them again.
No. Oh, well,
not ever.
I might in the future. Somebody asked me about, they were like, "Oh, your background looks cool," and I was like, "I didn't start this way." I go, "You are seeing 19 years of tweaking." I go, so, and I thought about, I just don't know how. Again, looking at my audience, like, "Oh, here, I'm going to tell you the story of me," and I'm like, boring. Like, what's in it? I have to figure out what are the
Well, maybe not.
yeah. Well,
But
that's me. I'm like, I got to figure out what's the
yeah,
takeaway, that type of
right,
thing.
right. Right.
So
Yeah, and your takeaway may be just for a few people. I mean, again, the oftentimes the work that you do, you don't know. You don't know how it's
yeah,
going to be till you get it out there. So, yeah, and Ken Blanchard says, start ugly. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
well, we all do. That's just we get better the longer we go. We get more practice. We figure some things out. We get comfortable with some stuff. It's like doing voiceover work. And Jody's out in chat. She can probably attest to this. Voiceover work, I think we just think you turn a mic on and start talking. And yeah, that's great. No, no. There's actually a lot of talent and skill and practice and education that goes along with doing voiceovers. Yes, I'm a podcaster. I tried doing voiceover. There we go for Gallup back in the day. I need more practice. And just because you're a podcaster doesn't mean you're a voiceover artist. Like that
right.
takes a different skill. So, anyways, get in there, get some practice some stuff. It's just like if you're going to do a host read, you should probably read that at least 25 times before you read it for real. Like practice the thing. Get read it a couple different ways. Get comfortable with it. Read it in front of some people and get some feedback from them. It's one of those, the best read host ads that I've ever read are ones that they've done a lot. The host has done it a lot of times, so they're good at. Well, think about what we do in the very beginning of the show. You've got Mark's ad down, right? And so you're not stumbling trying to figure out like, okay, what am I going to say next? You know what you're going to say. That's because you said it through 200. I don't know how long Mark's been advertising here, but at least 200 times
Yeah.
probably, right? Now, imagine if you put that work into the ad before the first time you read it recorded. I mean, think about how good it is today. I think if you went back and listened to the first time you did the ad for Mark,
Oh man.
like
Yeah.
we got it done. It was just kind of average, right? I mean, it was just like, oh, okay, well, that's okay. You got better as you went. So imagine if you practice before you record for the first time, how much better you could be. So don't stop doing things the first time live or stop
Yeah.
doing things, right? Don't get some practice in. Practice it. Practice.
Yeah. Some good comments here from the chat. Chris says no one goes to the gym once and comes back shredded. Yeah.
Well,
Amen.
I mean, I do, and you do, but nobody else does.
Yeah.
Nobody else.
Craig from Ingleus Podcast. It doesn't matter how you start, nobody's going to be listening. Yeah, that's always the fun thing is when you watch people go from nobody's going to listen, and then they freak out, and I'm like, what's the problem? They're like, I got 100 downloads, and I'm like, yeah. They're like, yeah, but some people, I got to watch what I say now. So, Danny says it took me 7 years to get to a place where I'm happy with the recording space and the sound. We do need to help new podcasters learn to ignore anyone telling them they need a SM7B when starting. Yeah, that's Samson Q2U, anything but if you're going to use a Blue Yeti, just use it right. And then Danny had another comment in here. I hate to hear this. Oh, so crappy. He's got a new podcast coming out called, I think it's 5 Random Questions. I've got it on my calendar. But basically he has to reschedule. His basement flooded. And I did that once in my, back in the day when I had a house. I have a house now, but anyway, I had all my musical equipment in the basement, and our hot water heater broke, right? And so just 30 gallons or whatever it is now all over the basement floor, and my little guitar pedals are underwater. And my wife tells me, I look at the steps, and I'm halfway down the steps looking at the pool that is now my basement floor and seeing things underwater, and I jump off the steps. And as I'm in midair, I'm like, oh, there's still electrical things plugged into this. I wonder if I'm going to get electrocuted when I land. And there's not much you can do when you're in the air. Luckily, that was not the case. But flooded basements are definitely no fun. So I'm sorry to hear that, buddy. That sucks. Ever had a flooded basement, Jim?
Minor, nothing
Yeah.
we ever had to repair. We've got a drain in the middle of the floor, and sometimes it is not far from my podcasting area, so I have to make sure that we don't do that. But nope, Danny, sorry to hear that you do. It's a mess when you do. Our friends up north got a bunch of water that's now coming our way. Things are flooding on the Missouri here. By the way, just as a side note, this week we did a whole company kind of update. Once a month we all get together, everybody jumps on Zoom, and our CHRO did this flood update. We have a little deck that's kind of built over the Missouri, so he stood on the deck and had the Audio Technica, the ones that I had bought. I had the company buy those Audio Technica BPS ones,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
over the head, and then we use the Focusrite Solos. That's not what they're called, but you guys know what I mean with the Solos, right? One input goes in, and he was standing on the deck with the headset out doing a live update on how the river is doing with that headset on, and everybody was like, "That's awesome," right? And so I was like, "You're welcome, you're welcome for that." Getting all
Yeah.
it didn't happen directly, but giving everybody advice like, "What do we need on these things?" And so having the right it's having the right equipment when you do. And this is, again, physician heal thyself. I need to remember this. Having the right equipment, not the cheapest, the right equipment is when it does work, it's amazing. You're like, that's super cool. So everybody was like, well, you should start doing the weather and like in Zoom chat. It was super funny.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Mystic Max says, would you add a side widget with a subscription button on your podcast page? If you want one, they're super easy. You go to Podpage and you put in the links to your show on those particular things. And then inside of Podpage, you can say, put this in the sidebar. Do you want big buttons, small buttons? Do you just want the name? And likewise, you can have them on your front page if you want them. So it's super customizable that way. And it's super easy if you just go to if you go to music.amazon.com, find your show, which can be a challenge. But once you get your show, there's a share button right there. And so you click on share, you copy the link, and that's the link you put into that's your Amazon link. And you do the same thing to Spotify. And if you go into Apple Podcasts, their dashboard, you can get the link there. You can get buttons, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, this is, what are we looking at? We're looking at Building a Better Dave. And you'll see where I have subscribe buttons right here on the right-hand side. I could also have those up here at the top. If I go to my homepage, is my homepage? Yeah, I have this one set up so that there's no big thing at the top here. It just starts off with the different episodes and stuff. And if there's too much money at the end of the month, or too much month at the end of the money, check out the episode there. Get your money working for you. I've been doing some. A very wise businessman once told me that pennies make dollars, and I've been paying attention to my pennies, and lo and behold, I'm ending up with more dollars. So that's always fun.
Good work.
Question from Danny. He says, when it comes to podcasting apps, are you trying to encourage listeners to do so on apps that support value for value? I do, or still pushing to the usual Apple, Spotify. I am torn. That's a great question. Because I think Cast-O-Matic is a great iOS app. It looks just like, in my opinion, Overcast. It's very, very similar. And I loved Overcast. It just doesn't do value for value. So I like to put, do I have Cast? Yeah, I have Cast-O-Matic there on the last page we just looked at. And so I want that because I want the streaming Satoshis. However, Apple and Spotify both give me the ability to see how far people listen. And you can kind of reverse engineer that with value for value. You can see when somebody was giving me, 10 sats a minute, and then all of a sudden at minute 13, they quit showing up. So you can kind of do that. Not quite as easy as you can in Apple Podcasts. But yeah, I have been. And I just listened to the latest episode of the Podcasting 2.0 show. And the problem is we all were using a service called Albi to set up our wallet. And because of all the companies are getting a little worried, because if the U.S. government just says, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. This is the new rule on crypto. Everybody breaks, so they're all worried about, which makes sense. They're all a little worried about building their house on rented land in a way. And so there was some new thing that Adam found from a bunch of ham radio guys, eCash or something like that might work. And we're just trying to find the loophole so that in the event Uncle Sam comes down with some bad news, we've still got, we're not sunk. Because if Albi went away, because they're still doing things in Europe, they're not issuing U.S. wallets right now. And Sam Sethi over at True Fans has kind of found a hack around that, so we're not dead in the water. But it's just one of those things where I'm a little worried on that. We'll see. There's still a lot of great features. I mean, as much as we all talk about the streaming Satoshis, and why wouldn't you? That's the fun part where you get paid. There's still a lot of great features in 2.0. But right now, it's like, can we kind of shore that up a little bit? Because that makes me worried. I've been talking about that a long time. I don't want to see it go away.
It's crypto is still a largely unregulated, and some people love it that way. It's largely unregulated, and they can do a lot of things. They just decide this is what we're going to do, and there's not a lot that can be done about that. And it's not right and it's not wrong. You got to go in eyes wide open on this kind of thing, just knowing what you're getting yourselves into. And so I love the value for value in the sense of finding another way. I just don't think I don't think as humans we're built in a way to actually make that work. Otherwise, radio, newspapers, television would have figured that out a long time ago. A lot smarter people, a lot more money than us, doing this for a lot of years. I mean, mass media, we're at least 100, maybe 200 years into this. If you think about newspapers, they would have figured out how to make value for value work. It would have worked by now, and it doesn't. Advertising is what works. That's how any of this kind of media stuff works. I'm not saying you can't do it, because there's certain cases where it does work, and Patreon, and I think of some of those kinds of things that those do work. But far and above, I think history says, and you might say, Jim, you're the old guy saying, get off my lawn.
No,
This is gonna work this time. Well, maybe it might. I doubt it, to be honest. It just hasn't worked yet. So
yeah, Danny's like, that was kind of a bit of a stumbling block, and Dan makes up the great point. In fact, Adam said this months ago. He's like, if we all use Albi, we are then using a centralized system, and that was the whole part of podcasting 2.0, is that so people couldn't shut us down. Rich has a question about changing your name. He says, when you change your RSS feed name, because I'm changing the name of my show, what places do you have to update that? Well, in theory, here in Libsyn, if you just go to settings and go to podcast, you can, like, if I want to just make this whatever, free podcast advice or whatever, I could change the name here. And then the way RSS works, if I was in Captivate, you can go just here. Here's your podcast website. Go to podcast settings. It's super easy to just come down here and just change the name, because the way casting works is RSS, the last S of that is syndication. And so here's your RSS feed is the source of truth. And then Apple looks at it and Spotify looks at it. So if you change it here, in theory, you shouldn't have to change it anywhere. What you don't want to do is, if your show is mywebsite.com/RSS, you don't want to make that yourwebsite.com/RSS, because that will break it, because everybody's looking at that address, and all of a sudden you went, oops, I'm over here now, and it's going to go, where'd he go? And so you don't want to change the actual name of the RSS link, but you can change everything inside of it. I mean, for years, I was laughing. I had my first show was The Musician's Cooler, and I think I forgot like an I or a C or something, and it had a typo in it. And I was like, you know what? Nobody sees the actual feed. Like, I don't know, Jim, what's a show you listen to?
Windows Weekly.
Windows Weekly, and their RSS feed is?
I don't know.
Yeah, we have no idea. Well, humans
don't
look
care.
at it. Yeah,
I don't really care. It could be anything.
Well, Libsyn used to allow you to change your feed name, and we would explain to people, we're like, hey, if you do this, like, everything explodes. You're back to zero. All your ratings, your reviews, it's like it's all going to go up in flames is there someone holding a gun to your head? And in some cases, it was a legal thing, and they like, no, I have to. But in most cases, it wasn't. And then they would change it, and you're like, okay. And then 2 weeks later, like, hey, my new episode's not showing up in Apple. I'm like, yeah, remember when we said? So we finally just said, yeah, it's enough of that. It created a lot of support calls that were just like, we don't need here to explain people how an RSS works. It was a lot of fun. So that's and I would give it 24 hours after you change it for that to show up. Also, if you're changing your artwork, make sure if it was called artwork.jpg, like make the new one artwork2.jpg, some sort of different file name, because sometimes Apple will check and go, oh, that's the same file, because it's the same file name when it's not. But it should take about an hour, a day to an hour would be great. Todd the Gator said, I added a subtitle to my podcast name in Libsyn and it transferred nicely. Where does that show up? Like the name I get, I've never been able to find an app that shows the actual subtitle. It shows the author name. Almost all apps show name and then the author, but I was like, I remember one time I put like just gibberish in the subtitle. I'm like, where does this show? And I went to every app and I'm like, I don't think Libsyn 5 has the subtitle anymore because we couldn't figure out where it went. There's like one lonely app somewhere that's displaying the subtitle. I'm like, so that's always fun.
Don't forget, a couple days after you've submitted this, Google the old stuff or search, however you want to do it. Go search for the old stuff and see, because there may be apps you submitted the RSS feed to that are disconnected from things for whatever reason. They don't pull updates, they don't do whatever. You might have had to put some things in manually. So give it a couple days, then go out, make sure you go out and search. You're going to have to be vigilant for a couple weeks, maybe up to a month, just to make sure you caught, everything that you submitted. Oftentimes as podcasters, we submit to absolutely everything. We never write any of that stuff down. I made a spreadsheet when I was doing some work on Home Gadget Geeks to say, here's all the places, and I did this at Gallup as well. Here's all the places we submitted to. And so I would know then, like, okay, if I've got to change anything or if I have to go back in and manually give them the RSS feed or whatever we need, I know where to go back and do the checklist. So if you haven't done that yet, might be a good idea. If you've gone outside of your host, certainly with Libsyn, Spreaker does this as well, where they'll help you submit your RSS feed to other places. If you chose to do that, you might want to just follow up at those places and make sure that an update has been done. You might need to log in and physically run an update. You might need to contact their support and say, this was the case with one of those FM, something.fm. I can't remember what it was. Where once it was submitted, it was completely disconnected from anything at that point. They weren't updating. You had to go in and you couldn't just update it on the site. You had to send them an email to their support team and say, hey, could you change the name of this thing on your site? So yeah, just and then document it. This would be a great time to get it documented.
Yeah. And if you are moving from, let's say you were on Buzzsprout and you moved to Captivate, both those hosts make it super easy for you to just click a button and submit to everybody but Apple, because you don't want to automatically submit to Apple. I'll explain that in a second. But if you've already done that and then you move to a media host number 2 and you do it again, your show is now listed twice. So that's where just by updating the feed, and then in most hosts there's a thing, if we get our nerd on, called a 301 redirect. And you basically say, hey, it's like a change of address for podcasts. Yeah. And so that's where if it was looking at a Buzzsprouts feed and now the feed says, hey, they live at Captivate, it'll update Apple and Spotify and Amazon to look over there. So don't do that twice. And with Spotify, what you do is you submit it there and then you go over to Spotify and you make an account and you claim it. And what it will do is it will send something via email. We all know the whole double authentication. So if you're using something like Buzzsprout or Captivate, you have to go in and say, put my email back in my feed, because both those hosts have it so that they pull your email out of it so you don't get as much of that annoying spam stuff. And so you put your email back. Spotify goes, hey, is this you? And you go, yep. And then you can go in and see all the fun-filled stats. Spotify is the only one you can see how far people listen. Apple does that, but Spotify allows you to see demographic stuff, which is also very weird because you can see, like, mine's primarily male, but you can also see like who your favorite artists, and it's like, oh, Ed Sheeran and Meshuggah or some death metal band. You're like, I have a very weird audience that listens to a wide range of stuff. Coach Dave is sharing here. We're talking about, the whole crypto, things like that. He said in Moosehead Lake in Maine, it's a small business owners branded together and created Moose Dollars, locally redeemable monopoly money that exchange between businesses. You buy X and use so many Moose Dollars for ice cream at this. So that's what we need. We need some sort of podcast tokens, and that's kind of what Bitcoin was going to be. In fact, James Cridlin used to call it internet tokens. So we'll see what happens. So, but yeah, and Todd said he updated the subtitle in Spotify. So apparently there's shocking that Spotify would have something that only works in Spotify, but they have apparently a subtitle that you can update there, and it didn't take long. So are blogs still a thing? The one and only Ken Blanchard wants to know. Yeah, actually, there are probably still more blogs than podcasts because people don't know there's podcasts. I don't know, but it's, YouTube is the king, then blogging. I need to research that. But I heard it on another show. They said that if you're trying to be found, be a big fish in a small pond, it's easier to be found. As much as we go, podcasting has a discoverability problem, it's easier to be found in podcasting than it is in blogs because there are people that have been blogging forever, so they're still there. I don't read as many blogs as I used to. I use Medium every now and then or Substack. That's kind of more my jam at this point because I can really fine tune. But I think that's probably, I don't know if it's more, but in terms of what I read more newsletters than I do blogs. And in theory, if they're smart, their newsletter should be a blog. I don't know. How about you, Jim? Do you read any blogs or newsletters?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, blogs have if we're just going to say it's a page associated with the podcast, sometimes we call those show notes, right? Yeah. That's a blog. Some people are still writing. There's a lot of writing. I mean, AI is going to change this where you can just so easily create these pages that there's going to be hundreds or thousands more being created than ever were before. So yeah, they're still out there and they're still helpful. You see a lot of these, best product for 2024 blog.
Yeah.
pages.
Yeah.
But now if you're looking for information, I mean, the old blog idea was more of a journal or more written from an individual's perspective or more, kind of that. It was like I want to say reviews, but they were kind of more, from a human perspective on things. I think most media has gotten away from that for the most part. I don't think there are many people out there doing as many. Certainly there are. I just don't think there are as many doing individual reviews and stuff via blog style. It does happen. I just don't think it's as popular as it used to be.
Yeah. Well, and with our good friend AI, there are probably more popping up that are giving you extremely mediocre content. Dan says, in my honest opinion, text versus audio is like audio versus video. It's different mediums with a lot of overlap in the content, but they still, it's different mediums with an audience. So yeah. Jeff says, I agree with Jim. I think getting people on your list and hearing from you, not an AI, is the best place to connect with people. Yeah, somebody asked me, they're like, what would be the number one call to action? And I said, get on my list. Because once they're on my list, I can ask them to do whatever I want. Now, if you ask too much stuff without giving them anything, they'll be like, this guy's just a spamming robot, and they're gone. But once they're on, like my newsletter, there's a section where it's like what I've been up to. And it's a link to every episode that I've done since the last time I put out a newsletter. And it says the name of the show, and then there's a follow link. So I'm hoping I'm getting more subscribers over there. But it's just one of those things that I'm surprised at how much traffic I'm getting from people who probably maybe saw it in the app, and they're like, oh, I'll have to listen to that later. And then they see, oh, yeah, I was going to listen to that. I never did. They're jumping back to the audio in that. Craig says, I think human opinion and analysis is going to be valued a whole lot more going forward. Yeah, me too. Although I am finding some AI. I'm working on an episode on here are ways, you can use AI as a podcaster. And I finally started taking time to learn Descript. And normally we end the show at noon, and by 4:30, I'm done because I've putting in chapters and editing out. And between myself, this is primarily, it's about 90% me and about 10% Jim. We will have somewhere over 300 to 400 ums in that. Especially, I'm going to try not to do it today when we get to our awesome supporters, but I am always looking over here and switching this. And as I'm doing it, I go, I'm just an and a machine. And so I went to Descript and I said, remove filler words, but I said, don't do them all. Just look for ums. And I think I said, look for double words. So where I'll be like that thing, well, that's a double word. And it put them out. And then I said, add markers. And that's basically, so it basically kind of figures out where we change subject and put those in there. I was kind of bummed because I could say add timestamps and it gives me timestamps. And I'm like, yes, add those to the script. And it's like, nope, I can do markers and I can do timestamps. I can't do markers with timestamps. I'm like, okay. So I copied the timestamps because that's great for YouTube-ish because it is edited. But bottom line, I was done by 1:30 and I'm normally done about 4 o'clock. And so the beauty is when you have chapters in Descript, you can then export the audio and say, hey, those markers that you made, use them as chapters. Because this show kind of needs chapters. We bounce around all over the place. So that's one where I was like, huh. So the more I get into Descript now, granted, everything I learned last week in Descript is probably gone because they changed their interface on an hourly basis. But that's an example of AI. And Jim, you were talking about how you have something in Otter that you do where it finds businesses or something.
No, I ask, what are the products we discussed, and it'll bring back the product names of the things we talked about. It's it's a gadget show, so it's kind of helpful to be able to pull some of those back. I could add links to them if I wanted to. That'd be one of those summary. That's one of the things AI is really good at with some of these summary. Taking a conversation, the ultimate summarization. I can't say that word right. Is to then just give me a list of those things. I also ask it, give me some quotes. This is in Otter. OpenAI does it just as well, but give me some quotes from it, and it pulls back 3 or 4 quotes that I add to the show notes, which is kind of nice.
Nice. Craig asks, did it still sound natural? And this is where I was almost positive I was going to have a bad edit because I listened to like 3/4 of it. And I was like, good enough. And yeah, I didn't hear any. So that's good. But Jeff says you might want to be careful with that double word thing because it's not always great. But the one thing I did notice is as I was listening, it did not mark our awesome supporters as a chapter, as a marker. And I was like, I kind of want to make sure people can jump right to that. But speaking of that, we should probably thank our awesome supporters. If you want to be an awesome supporter, it's super simple. Just go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, and you can be like all these awesome people. And of course, this show is brought to you by the School of Podcasting, where you get awesome courses. I had somebody join this week that had been podcasting a while. They went through the Planning Your Podcast one, and they're like, wow, I didn't do half this stuff. And I was like, well, there you go. That's why you're here. And our community is awesome. We've got, we just had somebody yesterday that's doing 14 podcasts. 14. I was like, well, there you go. I can now say I know somebody with more shows than I do. And they're all for boomers, which is great. And then you get unlimited coaching. So if you want to hang out with me, people go, so like unlimited. I'm like, yeah, that means unlimited. Like if it's available on my calendar and you want it, you take it. And of course that comes with a 30-day money back guarantee. And we run on Podpage. If you want to try Podpage, it's super simple. Just go over to trypodpage.com. If you want to learn Podpage, I got a free course. Go over to learnpodpage.com. And right now we're using Ecamm because it's so good. If you ever wondered why it says Ecamm with 2 M's, that's why. So good. And I'll be going to Ecamm Creator Camp later in October. I'm looking forward to hanging out with those peeps. And if you need more Jim Collison, and who doesn't want more Jim Collison? Just go over to that one, speaking of hitting the wrong buttons, theaverageguy.tv, and check out Home Gadget Geeks. And it's time for the Wheel O Names. So let's jump over there. And so who will it be? Will it be John Muntz? Will it be AI Goes to College or Ross Brand or the Ask Ralph podcast? Well, we'll find out when I click the button here. Round and round she goes. And it is... Wow, that was almost Craig. But no, it's our buddy Ross Brand. And he does, I know his show, streaming. I should know this. This is how well I know my awesome supporters. I know Ross. Just Google Ross Brand, live streaming. Live streaming pros is not Ross. It's, do you know the name of his show, Jim?
Yeah.
Here, let's just do this live. Let's see how good Ross's SEO is. Ross Brand podcast. It's something streaming world, streaming.
Live stream universe.
Live stream universe. There we go. It's total brain fart. I was like, I know it. Honest, I do. And so thank you, Ross, for being an awesome supporter, even though I can't remember the name of your show. That wasn't embarrassing at all. If you want to be an awesome supporter, how could I forget that? You
forget sometimes when you're doing things live. It's hard.
Yeah.
You forget it.
So does this show, are we saving you time? Are we saving you money? In fact, Coach Dave says, where did it go? He said where he did something with and that's Coach Dave is an awesome supporter, but he said he fixed something with knowledge from the school or from Ask the Podcast Coach. So if we're saving you money, if we're saving you headaches, then go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome and be an awesome supporter. And we do have an interesting question here. I don't know if you can fix this, but she says, this is from Susan Flamingo over at Reddit. Hi, friends. I narrate my podcast. I record in Audacity and enhance with Adobe Voice Enhancement, which really makes the recording perfect. But I have a problem. I sound like I'm talking with my nose clogged, because it is. I have a disorder in which one nostril is almost always totally blocked. It causes sleep apnea and a bunch of other stuff. Is there a way I can alter the voiceover so it will sound normal with this effect? Thank you and have a good day. And so I just picture Rudolph, when it talks like this, they think my nose, that whole so if this is how you sound, number one, nobody else is going to sound like you. You're always going to be kind of clogged up. So that's going to be like a good thing. But aside from going into the EQ and maybe taking out a bunch of the mid, I mean, if you literally sound like Rudolph, you're going to sound that way. I don't know if there's anything we can do to make you sound less clogged up. Any thoughts off the top of your head?
If there are moments, they said always, but maybe there are a few moments when it's not always.
Yeah.
This may be one of those areas where AI in the future could help you, where you sit down and record a bunch of you not in that sound, and then reproduce you have to do transcripts and some of those things. As Danny says, think that could be fixed with EQ. It's a lot. That's a lot to ask of EQ.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you're going to have to fix it every single time.
Or set up. You could probably get a plugin for a paramedic EQ, and that sounds like a big fancy word, but basically you find that frequency and you can pick how many other frequencies around that. So you end up with this kind of dip, and that dip can be really super specific for just that one frequency or a whole frequency range there, and then you pick how much of that you want to take out. So that could, if you sound like you're stuffed up, you're going to sound like you're stuffed up. But
it's going to be hard. Yeah, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, and that's what. Yeah, Danny says create a template. But if you go to, again, I'm a big fan of Waves plugins. I'm sure they've got a paramedic QE there. But it could be, Craig says my co-host had a blocked nose passage and had a minor operation to clear it. So there he's fine. Yeah, or cocaine. That's always
I
yeah,
don't do
no,
that.
yeah.
We neither endorse nor.
The problem with that is then you lose your nose, and you're like, hey, the great news is I don't sound standoff. The bad news is my nose fell off. So yeah,
Not advisable.
don't do
Certainly,
cocaine.
I'm sure this individual has consulted with medical people and those kinds of things as far as what you can do about a long term. Listen, the other option, and you kind of alluded to this, Dave, is just embrace it.
Yeah.
Like, that's your voice, and if it's that way most of the time, embrace it for what it is. And yeah, will people have a problem listening to it? Maybe, and if they do, that's their problem. Right? There's not. I think of all the unique, voice folks that are out there, and many of them, once people start listening to them, you stop hearing those kinds of things. And if people have a problem with it, maybe they shouldn't be your listeners.
I think
So
he's still around. There was Dr. Dave Shrink Wrap Radio, and Dr. Dave sounded like this. He kind of always sounded like he was hoarse, like a Doc McGee from the Celtics used to sound always hoarse, right? But the minute I heard him, I knew it was, Dr. Dave. And for the record, Dr. Dave ruins my voice. So holy cow, that hurt. Yes, don't do that. But yeah, there are all sorts of people with different. Rob Greenlee has his as soon as I hear Rob Greenlee, I know it's Rob Greenlee, and that's and then Todd over there at New Media Expo. Like, everybody just sounds the way you sound. The one that really blew me away was Michelle Coshocton did a show with Michael Hyatt. It was Michael Hyatt's show. She was kind of color commentary, and she got tongue cancer, and they ripped out half her tongue, and so she had a saying where her S's were kind of like, and I'm not making fun of her, but this is how she sounded, and it was weird. There's a thing called, I think it's nose blindness. And this is basically, hey, let's talk about farts, shall we? This is where when you like, your farts don't smell that bad, right? But if somebody else does.
Not mine, for sure not mine.
And then if you're in some place and you're like, oh, this is so bad. But after 2 minutes, you're like, okay, it's not as bad. Like, your nose somehow and your brain filter out that, so it's not quite as bad, right? So with Michelle, when she first came on, because she had taken off because she had cancer, and she came back, and I was like, holy cow, how courageous to come back with a little bit of a speech impediment. And within 5 minutes, I totally didn't even notice it. I don't know if that's, ear blindness or whatever, but when she first started, it was like, oh, wow, I can't believe. I mean, anybody with an accent, Danny's got a kick butt Scottish accent. And so when he first comes on, it takes me a second to go, oh, wait a minute, I gotta put on my filter or, and I'm sure Danny does the same thing to me. He's like, oh, wait, he's speaking American. I gotta figure this out because that guy sounds weird compared to me. So it's, I absolutely adore accents, man. We have Mark Lawley from Practical Prepping, and he's from Alabama. And he sounds like he's from Alabama, and I could listen to that guy talk forever. It's great. He's always like, oh, Dave says I have an accent. I don't, it's like, or Dave Ramsey. There's another guy with an accent. Just be you. It's,
be you, be comfortable with it. It does, does say, I think we can push through, the brain will push through some of those things, but it won't push through really bad audio.
No.
So I think those are two different things. If you're getting bad audio, I started podcasts where I've listened to them, and it's obvious they were recording in a big empty room with one microphone. And I get 5 minutes in, I'm like, my brain cannot adapt to this. But all the other things, and I think you're right. I think we're really good. Our brains are really good at adapting to that. And I think we've been doing this long enough now. I mean, Dave, maybe 50 or 75 years ago, accents were a thing. Listen, we all, in the global world, we all come with some kind of whatever in the way we speak. We all do it a little bit different. And I think, I don't think it needs to be a thing anymore. I think we can just it's fine.
I think we're more self-conscious. I was listening to the Podcasting 2.0 show last night, and one of the developers from RSS.com, I'm pretty sure, is from India, and he had an accent. And again, it takes you 2 seconds. You're like, oh, that's okay. And, there's milliseconds of where you have to kind of like, oh, he said aluminium instead of aluminum. You know what I mean? It's like, but it's not that big a deal.
But we know what they mean.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you're the first time you hear it, you might be like, Wait a minute, what does that mean?" It's just like I was over in London giving a presentation, and I mentioned something about warm ketchup. What I meant was room temperature ketchup, but they were thinking like I was warming up,
Heating it up.
putting it
Yeah.
on the stove.
Throw it in the
And
microwave.
like pants mean different things to
Oh
them
yeah.
than they do to us, right? But so you make a mistake and there's some giggles the first time and people are like, "Oh, actually here when we say that we mean this." And then you go like, "Oh, okay. I'll work on like it doesn't we can change, especially in those environments." And then you go, "Okay, I'll work on saying that." Or you just the other thing the other culture can adapt to, when people say, I'm trying to think. We call in a car, we call the trunk. We call it in America the trunk. The British call it something else. I forget. What it is.
I know the hood is the bonnet because I remember the one time this guy told me a story, and he goes, "I hit a stair and it flew up on my bonnet." Or no, I hit a stag, and it flew up on my bonnet. I'm like, a stag? Well, a stag is how I went to prom, and a bonnet is a hat. And I found out later he hit a deer and it flew up on his hood. So yeah, that's always
A
fun.
boot. Yeah, Gary says a boot. Yes.
Yeah.
And so you guys, we're smart enough to just go, "Oh yeah. Okay, I get it. I get what you're saying now." And so it doesn't. We don't all have to say the same things. It doesn't all have to be said the same.
Right.
We can do this culturally. We can adapt. We don't need to make fun of it. We don't need to, we don't need to call it out. Just if you know what it is. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. Let's keep go. Let's keep going forward. So I think because we've got so much communication going on around the world, I think we can get past most of that stuff, accents and the different words for things. They don't have to be the same. And I think we can stop calling it out in a lot of regards. And if we know what that means, say it. If we don't, say, "Oh, tell me what that means."
Yeah.
Just say that so you have the clarity and then remember it.
What do you mean when you say I'm a wanker? What does that mean? So,
yes. Indeed.
But yeah, I think a lot of that, in the same way that we hate the sound of our own voice, I think if we're doing English as a second language, those people get really obsessed over their accent. I mean, I'm with you. I'm like, look, I can understand you. Let's move on, shall we? So,
yeah.
But Danny's got kind of it's adjacent, but still kind of talking about this. At what point does the audio stop you from listening to what might be really good content? And again, I'm not throwing shade at DR, but towards the end of her little segment there, it was getting worse. That would have been, I'm out of here. And again, that wasn't her fault. We're not blaming her. It's probably her PC kind of thing. But that, like, or if let's do this. If I kind of did this with Voica and you just, that's not going to work. So different, if the guest is really loud and the person is really soft. Anything else you can think of? Well,
I don't think there is a point. I think because your mood can determine whether you're going to continue to listen to it or not. There's been lately, I have just really been struggling to listen to podcasts. Like I put them on. I don't feel like I've got a lot of things going on right now. I don't feel like learning more at the moment. So that can also be that tolerance can also be. I don't think we could say 7. What point?
Yeah.
Well, at 7 they stop listening. It doesn't. I don't know if it really works that way. There's a whole bunch of factors, including the person's tolerance for what's going on and the volume and what they're listening to it on and all those kinds of things. But I mean, I guess the point is make it the best possible audio quality you can. Listen to the feedback if you're getting stuff and continue to hone your craft.
I can't remember if it was 7 or 17. But it was a ways, and there was a guy it was tips for people that teach computers, like computer software. And I'm like, this episode was made for me. And the guy came on and talked about how much he loved Bob Seger or how much he hated Bob Seger. And I was like, okay, but like the title is tips for people that teach computers, and he just kept going on about Bob Seger. And I just kept thinking, well, surely he's going to start talking about, and it was, I can't remember if it was 7, it was a long time when I'm sitting there going, you got to be kidding me. And the audio was pretty bad. And I remember thinking, I wouldn't listen to this except he's going to talk about the thing I want to hear. And whatever it was, 7 or 17, at one point I ejected because I was like, okay, he's not getting to the point. And the audio was really bad. But yeah, it's, and I don't tie into this whole bit of like we have short attention spans. I think what it is we're much better at diagnosing like when somebody's going to waste our time. And so you do have to kind of hook them at the beginning. And that's to me. Try to get to, I watched a video on YouTube when they were talking about STV, which is seconds to value. And that's, if you notice, I noticed a lot of the channels I used to watch where they used to go, big opening line hook, yada, yada, yada. And then it'd be like, and flashy graphics and blah, blah, blah. Like that's gone. It's like, I think it's Think Media. They literally put their logo up and you hear somebody go, just press record. That's their opening like sequence now. It's like really, really short. So that's always fun. And yes, Gary says breathers. Here's the problem. I don't think a lot of times it's with breathers. It's that somebody who maybe they're a little too close to the mic. Maybe they are a little bit of a breather and then they run it through Auphonic. And if you're breathing loud enough, Auphonic thinks it's a word. And so all of a sudden it's just, I just had a friend of mine, this was hard to do. Timothy Keem O'Brien does a show about finding new podcasts. And I said, Tim, I love you. I said, but once I hear this, I can't unhear it. And sometimes he would breathe and, people breathe. I always say, like, don't obsess over that. But there were other times when it was literally like just super loud. And then once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. So that would, and that I think is not, again, Tim's problem. I don't think Tim is Darth Vader. I think that's a case where Auphonic thought that was a word and its goal is to make all the words the same level. And it boosted his breathing to where it was that. So,
Well, I think there was a time in this show, I remember going back years ago, you were running the show here through some leveler, whatever it was. And you were giving it the feed and you were high and I was low. And when it leveled me, it really changed my breath. And you could, in there, you could really hear that. And like you said, that's one of those things where once I heard it, I could not unhear it.
Yeah.
And I think we fixed that since then. But
the
people do breathe. We do take a breath when we're talking. So that does happen. You can't get all of that out. I guess you could go through and individually take out. That would be so much work.
Been there, done that. Yeah. I, for one of my editing clients had the same thing. And that's where I have to, I'm better at this now because I used to, like, if I could hear it, it wasn't quite so much. It was like Darth Vader light. And I was like, is this me being an obsessive podcast listener or is that actually going to be distracting? And sometimes I will let them go now because I'm like, no, that's just, it's a breath. We, don't obsess over it. So
when we're talking to people, when we're spending time with people at a party, we don't say to them, stop breathing. I'm hearing you breathe.
Right.
Like it's just a part of what we do. It's a part of life. God, get past that in some regards. It also is super weird. I edited a podcast one time and I took out they didn't like the breathing and I took it all out and it was eerie. Like you'd listen to it and you're like, this doesn't sound, it sounds AI is what it sounds like. That's kind of one of those things you can tell an AI voice because there's no breathing in it.
Yeah. Danny says podcasters can also help make their guests sound awesome with some post-production. I have a deep breath plugin that I use. And sometimes the thing I hate about it is it will work great 95% of the time. And then there's one word that somebody raises their voice or it's a different, like actual, like the note of it is a little higher. So it's now into the range, like a breath is probably up around the 10K range if we get our nerd on. And now they're talking up there. And so the stupid breath thing takes out half the word and you're like, and so it's again, it's a fun thing. Dan says, I think it's similar to listening to bad audio. We don't need long to know it's something that we can listen to or not. Yeah, you can usually tell right up front. As soon as I hear it's two people on a Blue Yeti in a room with it set up to go pick up in every direction, I'm like, yep, and we're out of here. Like I can smell that a million miles away. So
Dan also says he was listening to some voices in 11 Labs, and they've added breathing to those voices to make them sound a little more
nice.
Could you imagine? Okay, let's think in an alternate world where we have robots that are speaking to us, and they add in. They don't need to breathe, right? But they add in the breath to make it feel and sound more human. Could you imagine how? I mean, they would have to, right? It's like when Tesla, before Tesla, there were EVs before Tesla, but there's been some talk about initially adding some engine noise to EVs so that people can hear them coming, because you don't hear, there's no engine noise. But what if we added some engine noise when it was around people so people would know they're there? I mean, that's kind of weird, right? But so I imagine an android or a robot that's added breathing. That would be so weird.
Yeah. Todd the Gator hilarious. Says that moment when you hear your guest and you think, gonna be a long night of post editing. Yeah, I've been there with that. Speaking of weird robot stuff, it's not gonna let me see it. I was looking at a book. It was something like Words That Compel or whatever stupid thing it was. It's not gonna. But anyway, I looked for it in Audible because I have the Audible account that gives you audiobooks, and I was like, oh, and it was like a condensed version of this, and I hit play, and the first thing I heard was an ad, and I'm like, that's weird for an audiobook, and it wasn't an ad for Audible. And then the narrator came on, and it was so blatantly AI, and I was like, is this what people are doing now? We're just gonna like come up with a summary of it, let AI read it, and then get paid from Spotify, which is next to nothing from what I hear, because they're known for paying their artists so much money. And I just thought, wow, that's okay. And then, do you look at how much are we doing on time? Well, we can do this in 3 minutes. Jim, do you look at reviews? I usually don't look at reviews for podcasts, but I do on books because I've only got so many credits. Yeah.
Or before I buy something, or what? Yeah. What's the criteria?
Yeah. If you buy, I guess in this case, I'd be buying an audiobook.
Yeah, I'll take a look. Well, I don't buy audiobooks, but I use reviews. If I'm going to be buying something, I'll take a quick look at the reviews just to see if it's a sham or if it's, if somebody's got some. I don't believe everything that's in the review, both positive and negative, but yeah, I'll take a look at the reviews.
Yeah, because I was going to buy this book, and then I went to Amazon, and I always look at the 4-star reviews and the 2-star reviews because they're usually a little more descriptive. And the 2-star one, the one was like, it's really, this guy talks about some sort of software around whatever it is, neuro-linguistic programming. And they said it's really a mild advertisement for this guy's software. And I saw a couple people mention that. And then the people that really liked the book were really super nerdy about NLP. And I was like, yeah, this is not the book for me. So I was just like, hey, look at that. A review actually, influenced me to not buy that book. Or I can get the ebook. And I talked about this in my last episode of the School of Podcasting. I can actually get that ebook from the library. So why spend money on something you can get for free? And the library's fun. I haven't been to the downtown. I want to contact my local library. I'm going on vacation in a couple weeks. We're still doing the show and stuff, but I'm going to take a vacation. And that's one of the things I have on my list is contact a local library about kind of not so much how to podcast, but how to listen to podcasts, because what we need is more listeners. So that's what I'll be working on in the future. And Jim, speaking of the future, what's coming up on Home Gadget Geeks?
Yeah, Ed Sullivan from Sonic Cupcake. You know him from Sonic Cupcake. I know him from the Cigar Authority. He's on the show. He got an iPad Pro M4, the newest one, just came out about a month ago. Talked about how he used it on vacation. We spent some time why. And at the end of the show, Ed predicts my next Mac purchase. So is that a little hook, a little cliffhanger?
That is a hook.
Get some story arc. You can get it. It's already published. It's out there, homegadgetgeeks.com.
And the fun thing is, because it's Saturday and it's coming out Monday, I'm not sure what the... Wow. Okay.
Leading June weight loss challenge with 2 days left.
Okay. Thanks. I'm in a weight loss
Excellent.
challenge with a bunch of friends. Thanks. Yeah. The good news is I figured out how to get Siri to tell me when my meetings are coming up. And apparently anything that pops up on my screen, I thought I do have Do Not Disturb. Nope, Do Not Disturb is turned off because it's 12 o'clock. There you go. But on the School of Podcasting, I think I'm going to do an episode on how much I spend to make the School of Podcasting. Somebody asked me that question and I was like, huh. But in that, explain that this is me 19 years into it. And I didn't start this, I didn't start with video and cameras and all that stuff. I started and worked my way up. I think that's where we're going on the School of Podcasting. I have a list of, when you don't know what you're going to do, here are the topics you should do for the School of Podcasting. So that's coming up. We are here every Saturday morning, unless I'm on the road or if Jim's off saving the world. It's always askthepodcastcoach.com/live. Thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co and Dan over at Based on a True Story Podcast. Thanks to the chat room. If you haven't liked it yet, click the like button, subscribe, smash the bell, that whole 9 yards. And we'll see you next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach.